Welcome back to Music 101. These are the lectures for February 11th. We're continuing on in Chapter 17. So we were talking about, in the last lecture, talking about the secular version of medieval music, which was the French chansons, the troubadours, and the trouvères. We're going to be working on now the Italian version of that, which is the madrigals. So back in the Renaissance, music making was a social thing. Professional musicians, such as court or civic festivities, would get together and play for the court. There would also be amateurs that had music making at home. It was mostly vocal and instrumental music using the lute or a keyboard instrument, which is very, very different from now, which we have all different forms of music making. Music education was promoted with the well-bred women, and women achieved fame as professional singers later in the 16th century. So there was a lot of women that were successful in the music worlds back then. So this is a picture of four singers sitting together and singing from a book here. So during this time, the poetry and music kind of collided. So we have these beautiful lyrics that are being created kind of like we do today, and they were put to melodies. So we have the French chanson, we have the Italian madrigal, and the poetry helps shape the musical forms. So there was this thing called word painting, where they would change what the music was doing to match what the words were saying. So the madrigals were linking music and poetry. Madrigals were the most important secular genre of the era. Secular vocal compositions for 3 to 8 voices. It had an aristocratic form with poetry and music. It flourished in the Italian courts, and it was the favorite diversion of cultivated amateurs. So it was like the pop music of the day, combining those poetry with music. So the basic thing that you need to know, the French chanson was the same thing as the Italian madrigal, so it's just the same thing but a different country. They were sung from part books or chamber music. They had short text of poem of lyric relatively character, emotional words for weeping, sighing, trembling, dying, set suggestively. The topics were love, unrequited love, humor, satire, politics, scenes of city, country life. They used word painting, as we said, music directly reflecting the meaning of the words. So harsh dissonance when it said death, or an ascending line for heaven or stars, or an expressive device to enhance the emotional content. So back in the early parts, early madrigals, they were a pleasure to amateur performers. But as they expanded, they grew in complexity and expanded to 5 or 6 voices. Later in the madrigal era, as it was extending into the Baroque era, we have Monteverdi, who is influential in the Renaissance to Baroque transition. As we're going to talk about in the next few chapters, when we talk about Baroque music, Baroque became more ornamented, and so Monteverdi was the one that was moving it towards that. Monteverdi was born in Italy. He had a court position with a duke there, and he was the choir master at St. Mark's in Venice for 30 years. He wrote madrigals throughout his lifetime, 9 books of madrigals, and transformed the genre to emotionally charged soloistic style. Highlighted text throughout unprepared dissonances, speech-like melodies. He had a rich chromatic harmony, dramatic declamation, vocal virtuosity, and all of these words, vivid depiction of emotional words, new emotional intensity. He had 9 books of madrigals. He wrote sacred music, operas, which is a basically action, singing action, and other dramatic music. So we're going to listen to an example of one of Monteverdi's pieces here. There's a picture of the guy. He's actually probably one of my favorite composers from this time period, just because it's beginning to sound more like the music that we're used to. He believed that music serves expressive power of text, words conveyed clearly and passionately, reference to death, conceit for sexual climax, yay, refers to kissing and bodily interaction. So that was just kind of an example of that piece. So we're going to listen to that right now. It's 5 voice, it's a cappella. It's through composed, remember, so there's no specific format. There's nothing that repeats. It just one after the other. So you can tell it's totally different from the previous music that we have. Not melismatic at all. More common to what we would hear now if we heard a choir performing. It gives you a little taste. Let's go ahead and break it down with our interactive listening guide here. So this is a 5-voice singing about love and longing to die. So you can hear all the tension in the piece.
Here's what to listen for in S'Io vorrei morire, an Italian madrigal composed by Claudio Monteverdi. In this work, 5 voices sing about love and longing to die. Monteverdi wrote music to evoke the meaning of the text. This technique is known as word painting. For example, in this section, the higher voices sing De stringetemi finch'io venga meno, grasp me until I perish, and the music evokes this desire with descending melodic lines and a dramatically slowing tempo. Word painting enables a composer to more richly express a song's lyrics and melody.
Now we're going to listen for texture here.
This madrigal was written in 5 parts: soprano, alto, alto, tenor, and bass. The 5 parts allow Monteverdi to explore different textures, homophonic and polyphonic. In this section, each of the 5 vocalists sings a different melody, but all in the same rhythm. In contrast, in this section, the voices sing different melodies with different rhythms that result in harmonic dissonance. This dissonance adds tension to the emotional content of the work.
Next is the form.
This madrigal is mostly through composed, with the return of the opening phrase, at the end of the work. The effect of through composed form is that the text appears to tell a story about love. Remember to focus on the defining features of madrigals: word painting, changing textures, and through composed form.
Great. So that's an example of Monteverdi's Italian madrigals. We're going to keep going through. Basically, this kind of explains what we were talking about. So the three things that you need to be listening for is the word painting, the changing textures, as well as the fact that it was through composed. So those are kind of defining features of a madrigal. This is kind of the same thing. It's just outlined for you. You can see that part that they were talking about where they have the descending line for the word painting. So you see that right there. We kind of talked about that. Moving on to the madrigal in England. So during the Elizabethan era, the Italian madrigals began to develop into the native form. Similar text, there was a lighter style. Refrain syllables were kind of like fa la 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 and things like that. So this is a picture of some shepherdess. Queen Elizabeth is here, and she's surrounded by the musical ladies in waiting, playing for her. And this is just a typical artistic scene of a shepherd and shepherdess. John Farmer was an English composer and organist. He was active in Dublin and Ireland, and he moved to London, publishing a collection of 4 voice madrigals with clever word painting and light-hearted works. The Farmer's Fair Phyllis is a light-hearted pastoral English text talking about the shepherdess Phyllis pursued by her lover. And it has a happy conclusion. So we'll listen to that in just a second. And this is in English, but you're going to notice that you're not going to may not be able to understand all the words because it's so old that our English language has changed since then. Great. So let's kind of go into our active guide here. We can talk about, so the medium is an a cappella choir.
Here's what to listen for in John Farmer's English madrigal, Fair Phyllis. In the English madrigal Fair Phyllis, you will hear 4 voices singing a cappella with no accompaniment.
Now we'll talk about the texture.
You'll also hear changes in texture from one melody, or monophonic texture, to homorhythmic texture, in which all voices sing the same words at the same time, with the highest voice singing the melody and the other voices providing harmonic support. To imitative texture, where all voices sing similar melodies but begin at different times.
Now we go to word painting.
In the English madrigal Fair Phyllis, Farmer uses the technique of word painting, using descriptive music to convey the text. You can hear an example of this at the very beginning when a soloist sings alone to convey Phyllis sitting all alone. Another example occurs on the phrase up and down. The pitch on the word up is higher than the pitch on down.
And form.
The form of this catchy madrigal is made up of short repeated sections. You can hear the opening section immediately repeated. The last section also repeats. So remember to listen for 4 voices singing a cappella, changing textures, word painting, and short repeated sections.
So, you can find the lyrics in your book, like at page 92, if you want to, like, read them while you're listening. And that will kind of help because they're kind of hard to understand, and some of the English words are not quite the same as ours. Ooh, goodness. Anyway, that concludes chapter 17. I just have a few slides left, and it's basically just what we talked about, a breakdown of that. So I hope that helps you kind of understand some of the secular music in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. We will be talking about motets and the moving into Baroque music next week on February 18th. So please go ahead and read up on, let's pull up my syllabus here so that you can see. Go ahead and start reading up on chapter 18 through 20. Then our next exam will be February 25th, so go ahead and start studying for that. Remember, your online quizzes are going to be due on February 18th by midnight, same thing, an average of the quizzes. Also, the test this time will have a listening component, which we'll talk about on the 18th. Have a great week, and I will see you next week.